Roy Moore, the very controversial Alabama Senate Republican nominee, he was hit with a series of allegations by the Washington Post. 30 sources have talked to the Washington Post about Roy Moore's alleged history of when he was in his early 30s, trying to go out with women who are anywhere from 14 to 18 years old. The most serious allegation is brought by one particular woman who was 14 years old, named Leigh Korfman, and she alleges sexual assault by Roy Moore when he was 32 and she was 14. The allegations themselves are sickening. There are some people today who are trying to make light of the allegations by saying, well, he's 32 and she's 16 or 17. Is that such a big deal? Okay, I am 33 years old. Okay, I'm exactly the age that Roy Moore was when Roy Moore was apparently doing this stuff. The idea of even going anywhere near a high school freshman is so perverse and sickening. And anyone who ever tried to do that to my sister or my daughter, I would be very tempted to grab my shotgun from my safe, drive them to a remote spot, and take them out. Really, if someone were molesting my 14-year-old sister, that would be the proper solution. Now, the question is whether these allegations are true or not. But here's what the Washington Post says, and we owe it to the people who have spoken on the record by name to at least take the allegation seriously. And the reason I say that is there's this tendency on some people, on part of some people, on both the right and the left, to basically let things go when it's your side, right? So Teddy Kennedy drives a car off a bridge. There's a woman in the back. She dies. But Teddy Kennedy's really an important politician. He's part of the Kennedy family, so we let it go. Bill Clinton, he can molest the help. Doesn't matter. So long as Bill Clinton is for abortion. Nana Burleigh of Time magazine says that she would perform oral sex on him as long as he keeps abortion legal. Right? We see this with Donald Trump in the last election cycle. All these allegations of sexual assault and sexual harassment hit, and a lot of people say, well, lesser of two evils. You still got to vote for him, or at least we at least have to voice support for him. Now, I'm not going to equate voting for a candidate with necessarily supporting everything that the candidate does, and has done in the past, because there is more to it than that. But there is a moral question here as to whether you are allowed to either vote or support a candidate who does these sorts of things. And this is something that I had serious problems with during the election cycle. The lesser of two evils mentality, particularly in politics, will lead to the worsening of all of our politicians, because basically it allows you to get away with anything, right? The right doesn't trust the left, rightly so. We don't trust that the left is going to uphold any sort of moral standard with regard to their candidates. We look at all of these politicians that they've supported, despite how disgusting they are, and we say, well, if you're not going to withdraw support from politicians who do disgusting things, why should we? Why should we hamper ourselves by handing you an Alabama Senate seat by not supporting somebody like Roy Moore? This is immoral logic, because there's an actual, the difference between a normal prisoner's dilemma and this is that there's an actual moral imperative for people to come out against sexual assault. That does not exist in a normal prisoner's dilemma situation. But you can see why everyone is falling into this trap, right and left. The left looks at the right. They say, you supported Trump. Why shouldn't we support Clinton? The right looks at the left and says, you supported Clinton. Why shouldn't we support Trump? Each looks at the other and they say, you guys support bad guys, so why shouldn't we support bad guys? And so we all end up supporting bad guys. We need to have a bargain with one another as Americans. Everyone needs to say, I am not going to support bad people. Now, here are the allegations about Roy Moore. The easy way out for people on the right has been, over the past 48 hours, to basically say, well, it's not been proven. One of the problems with sexual assault allegations is it's very difficult to prove them, right? Particularly 40 years after the fact. If you believe Juanita Broaddrick, but you don't believe Leigh Korfman, you need to ask yourself why. Does it have something to do with politics, or is there something more credible about Juanita Broaddrick than Leigh Korfman? I don't think there really is. I think that Leigh Korfman seems relatively credible. And again, one of the questions here is going to be, does this fall apart over time? Does the story fall apart over time? Roy Moore denies the allegations, but you have to judge for yourself. And I think that we all have to be intellectually honest. Do you doubt the story, or do you doubt the story for political purposes? Right? Do you doubt that the story is true, or do you doubt it because you want to vote for Roy Moore, or because you want to support Roy Moore? Here's the allegation. On Thursday, the Washington Post dropped a bombshell report on Alabama Senate Republican nominee Roy Moore. They allege he engaged in a sexual assault of a 14-year-old and that he solicited multiple other underage women some 4 decades ago. So according to the Post report, this is over at Daily Wire, in 1979, Moore, then 32 years old, allegedly met a 14-year-old girl named Leigh Korfman outside a courtroom. He asked for her phone number, picked her up at her home, took her to his home, where he, quote, took off her shirt and pants and removed his clothes. He touched her over her bra and underpants, she said, and guided her hand to touch him over his underwear. After that, she asked him to take her home, and he complied. Okay, now, that would be just one allegation, but there are multiple allegations of Moore propositioning women who are very, very young. 3 other women between the ages of 16 and 18 say Moore propositioned them during that same period. The Post adds that none of the women say that Moore actually forced them into any sort of relationship or sexual contact. So it is slightly different than this most egregious allegation. According to the Post, Wendy Miller says she was 14 and working as a Santa's helper at the Gadsden Mall when Moore first approached her, 16 when he asked her on dates, which her mother forbade. Debbie Wesson Gibson says she was 17 when Moore spoke to her high school civics class and asked her out on the first of several dates that did not progress beyond kissing. Gloria Thacker Deason said she was an 18-year-old cheerleader when Moore began taking her on dates that included bottles of Matthias Rosé wine. The legal drinking age in Alabama was 19. The last one, you see the Washington Post trying to stretch a little bit. You know, a 32-year-old guy dating an 18-year-old girl is not my cup of tea, but suggesting that the real wrongdoing is that she drank. Okay, underage drinking is a thing in the United States. Okay, the idea that 18-year-olds don't drink is just silly. In any case, approaching 14-year-olds for dates and 16-year-olds for dates and 17-year-olds for dates when you're 32 years old, yuck. Yuck. So Moore denies the allegations. Korfman, by the way, voted for President Trump in 2016. She says she did not come out earlier on this story because she is thrice divorced and has children and was afraid that her story would be doubted. So a lot of people on the right are saying this looks like a coordinated hit. There's 1 month out from an election, and Roy Moore suddenly is being hit with these charges. It looks like an Oppo dump. Right? Why are all these women coming out now? Now, what the Post says is, as soon as we started talking to these women separately, we went down to start reporting on this race. This is the Post says in the article. We started reporting on the race. We were ignoring it because it wasn't that important. It's an Alabama Senate race. The Republican always wins. But we decided to go down and report on it. And when we did, there were these rumors about Roy Moore doing all these things. We went and we reached out to all of these women. They all spoke on the record. They all gave their names, and they all told similar stories. So that adds some credibility to these particular allegations. So the question becomes, number one, whether people should support Moore, and the second question becomes whether Moore should be moved off the ballot involuntarily. It's very difficult to get Moore removed from the ballot. If you do that, you can't replace him with anybody else. There's a sore loser law in Alabama that makes it nearly impossible for the Alabama Republican Party to replace him on the ballot. Now, you remember back all the way to 2002, the Democrats had a similar problem with a senator named Bob the Torch Torricelli. He was involved in corruption, and the New Jersey Democrats sued to have him removed from the ballot and replaced on the ballot by someone else. And the court ruled that was okay, which was a violation of the law. And a lot of Republicans were very upset about it. Well, this is a similar sort of situation. So Roy Moore is denying all of this. Here's his statement. He says, today, the Judge Roy Moore campaign for U.S. Senate issued a statement responding to yet another baseless political attack by the Washington Post, a paper that has endorsed Judge Moore's opponent. Moore campaign chair Bill Armistead released the following statement on Thursday afternoon. Quote, Judge Roy Moore has endured the most outlandish attacks on any candidate in the modern political arena, but this story in today's Washington Post alleging sexual impropriety takes the cake. National liberal organizations know their chosen candidate, Doug Jones, is in a death spiral, and this is their last-ditch Hail Mary. So he's relying on the media bias charge. Again, that carries some weight, right? You do have to say that the media bias charge carries some weight when the media, the same Washington Post way back when, I believe it was actually Newsweek way back when, was quashing Lewinsky stuff. But the Washington Post is against Roy Moore, but that does not change the credibility of the accusers, right? The accusers are named. Again, it says the Washington Post has already endorsed the judge's opponent, and for months they've engaged in a systematic campaign to distort the truth about the judge's record and career and derail his campaign. In fact, just 2 days ago, the Foundation for Moral Law sent a retraction demand to the Post for the false stories they wrote about the judge's work and compensation, but apparently there is no end to what the Post will allege. That story, by the way, is still out there. The Post has not retracted that story. That story says that Roy Moore took about $200,000 from the Foundation for Moral Law for doing very little work. And the statement continues, the judge has been married to Kayla for nearly 33 years, has 4 children and 5 grandchildren. He has been a candidate in 4 hotly contested statewide political contests, twice as a gubernatorial candidate, twice as a candidate for Chief Justice. He has been a 3-time candidate for local office. He has been a national figure in 2 groundbreaking judicial fights over religious liberty and traditional marriage. After 40 years of public service, if any of these allegations were true, they would have been made public long before now. Okay, now, that's not an argument I particularly like, the argument that we would have known about this earlier, because we now know that there are allegations that are surfacing about a wide variety of public figures that nobody knew earlier. Or if they did, they were rumored but never confirmed, right? Harvey Weinstein was doing this crap for 20 years, and we're finding about it now. Denny Hastert was the Speaker of the House for the Republicans for several years. Denny Hastert, it turns out, was molesting high school boys. Right? So this idea that it didn't come out for decades, therefore it must not be true, that's a little bit of weak tea. It's a little bit of weak tea. They say the garbage is the very definition of fake news and intentional defamation. The question is whether Roy Moore is going to actually file a lawsuit. even if he files a lawsuit, no guarantee that the lawsuit is either going to succeed or that it proves that Roy Moore is innocent of the charges. You can file a lawsuit and then later drop the lawsuit, right, without being countersued, presumably. President Trump has sounded off. According to the press secretary, she says that that Trump said, quote, he believes if allegations are true, he will do the right thing and step aside. He's calling for Moore to step aside if the allegations are true. But that statement, if the allegations are true, is a pretty dicey one because, again, there's no way for anyone to confirm whether the allegations are true except based on the word of the person who's talking about this. Right, so I know there are a lot of people who are thinking about, why wouldn't these women come forward earlier? Why did they keep silent for so long? And I think that it is important to read some of the accounts of women who didn't come forward earlier. I'm just trying to be intellectually honest as I can be about this because I don't know and you don't know. Right? I don't know whether it's true and you don't know whether it's true. All we can do is go based on the allegations that are made by 4 different named women in the Washington Post report and somewhat substantiated by supposedly about 30 witnesses. Right? So people who were talked to at the time. I think it's kind of a heartbreaking account from Nancy French. Nancy French is the friendly with the Daily Wire. She's the wife of David French, with whom I'm pretty good friends. And Nancy has ghostwritten for a wide variety of right-wing public figures, ranging from David Clark to Sarah Palin. And here is what she says. She says, I used to admire men like Roy Moore because I loved everything about church. The off-key a cappella rendition of Onward Christian Soldiers, the typos in the bulletin, the ladies who smelled like Aquanet with little rouge circles on their cheeks, and yes, men like Moore who said long prayers and ran the show. This changed one hot summer day when I needed a ride home from vacation Bible school. I was delighted when the preacher volunteered to drop me off. As we drove, I chatted incessantly, happy to have him all to myself without people trying to get his attention in the church parking lot. When we got to my house, I was shocked that he walked me inside my dark house, even more surprised when he lingered in conversation, and thunderstruck when he kissed me right on the lips. At 12 years old, I swooned over my good luck. He picked me out of all the girls at church, but the relationship, especially after he moved on, reset my moral compass. If all the church conversation about morality and sexual purity was a lie, what else was fake? Now that the family of God felt incestuous, I rejected the church and myself. Didn't I want the preacher's attention? Didn't I cause this? When I careened from faith, I made a series of poor romantic decisions that later almost cost me my life. Still, I couldn't very well criticize the church because I was an utter emotional mess. On Thursday, all of this came back to me after I read one sentence in the Washington Post. The article was about allegations that Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore sexually touched a teenager when he was in his 30s. A sentence from Lake Horfman, who was 14 at the time, jumped out at me. Quote, I felt responsible, she said. I swallowed back tears as I read the rest. I felt like I had done something bad, and it kind of set the course for me doing other things that were bad. After her life spiraled with drinking, drugs, boyfriends, she attempted suicide 2 years later. In fact, she didn't come forward earlier because she worried that her 3 divorces and poor financial history would make people doubt her story. This is one of the reasons why women don't come forward sooner, is because they do carry guilt when there are situations like this. And sexual predators, this is well known. Whether or not Roy Moore is one is still questioned, but it is true. Sexual predators tend to target girls who are in a vulnerable state. They tend to target girls who they can shed some sort of shadow on their credibility if push should come to shove. They'll target girls who are fragile emotionally and seen as unstable. And then if the girl says something, they'll say that it was fabricated. Right? This is very well known that this is something that older male sexual predators will do. Okay, with all of this said, I'm going to leave it up to you. When I say I'm going to leave it up to you, I'm going to say, well, here's my perspective, and then I'm going to say that you can have your own perspective. I believe that these allegations are credible. I believe the allegations are credible because this woman went on the record, and because there are multiple women who allege that Roy Moore reached out to them as teenagers, and that he went as far as they would allow them to go, and then stopped when they said no. Right? The allegations seem consistent to me, and they seem credible to me. With that said, would I support Roy Moore? The answer is no, but that was not my line for supporting Roy Moore. I think that Roy Moore has said things that would lead me not to support him anyway. Now, there is a complex calculus that goes on, unfortunately, in politics with regard to the impact of particular races. We are willing to accept more bad behavior from a presidential candidate because the presidency is so important. We're willing to accept bad behavior from Senate candidates because the Senate is so important. If this guy were running for dog catcher, would you vote for him? The answer is no. If this guy were running for Congress, would you vote for him? The answer is probably no. But you have to decide whether you believe the allegations are credible, and then you have to take a good hard look inside yourself and determine whether you think the allegations are credible, but you're looking the other way because you think that it is more important to elect someone who has done bad things but may implement an agenda that you like. If that's the case, then we really have reached the point where character means nothing in American politics, like nothing.